They are part of the founders of Reclaim Our Vote, which we have come together to create a platform for everybody to learn and share and engage and talk about the exact thing that has been designed to try to trick us, to try to keep us down, to try and keep the same people empowered, to keep the same policies in place that affect us directly in negative ways. So we want to come together to begin to learn more just on the most basic of levels of how we can infiltrate our local our local polls and vote to change the systemic things that have kept us down for so long. So no more are we silent. That's why we're here. So we're happy to have you all joining us. Tonight, we're going to be talking about economic disparity, the racial wealth gap, and voter suppression. These are all huge things that affect the way that things look like outside, what we see on the news. And again, we are here to discuss those things. And we've got a special guest today, but we're gonna let our board members kind of lead him in. We've got Kyle also on the line, so I want to give a shout out to her, who's on our board. And then Ross, of course, is gonna tell us a little bit more about what we're gonna be doing tonight. And also, before we do that, I want to introduce two of our partners that we have created Reclaim Our Vote and partnered with in order to bring you all this platform and activations that you'll see outside and also online. One of them is, excuse me, Black Boys Recycle. I believe we have Chris on the line. If you are, please unmute yourself. We want to hear from you.
How you doing? Hey guys, how you doing? Can everybody hear me? Am I good? Am I clear?
Yes, welcome in. Please tell us about Black Boys Recycle and how you are partnered in with us and what you do as Black Boys Recycle in the community and how your event turned.
Yes. Definitely got to recap the lemonade stand. And thank all you guys for coming out and supporting as well. I don't know if we have a lot of new faces in here. If you guys are here, you are in for a treat today. This is an amazing group of people, very powerful, very knowledgeable. I hope you guys enjoy it. I just want to start by saying that. And then from there, I think let you guys know, my name is Shines, by the way. And Black Boys Recycle is basically a lifestyle brand where we come together and we do activations and demonstrations throughout the community in different communities, and we repurpose the narrative of Black and brown people in different ventures and companies, whether it's cannabis, whether it's sports, whether it's living in Bel Air and owning your house, like we just had an activation. Our last activation was, and what we do is we kind of just change the narrative and repurpose the way people see us in these different facets of life. And with that, we do activations and demonstrations to basically showcase that. So this last activation we had in Bel Air, where we had a lemonade stand, we had the whole community come out and support a family who was basically being harassed by their neighbor. They had a white neighbor who was spraying the kids, which was a Black family, with a water hose. And it was a terrible situation for the kids and the family. They didn't get cited to over $9,000 in citations for the father who's been playing music in response to this, because they called the cops. No one did anything. So what we did, we set up a lemonade stand. We had a lemonade stand built for the kids. And we had a Black House from NoHo donate over 150 gallons of lemonade. And basically, we just had the whole community come out and support and donate for the family so that we can kind of get some of these citations taken care of for them, basically. And it was a great turnout. So I just want to thank everybody again for coming out there, and thank everybody for tuning in as well to reclaim our vote today.
Awesome. Thank you, Shines, for that. You can also follow Black Boys Recycle on Instagram. It's at Black Boys Recycle on Instagram.
Yes.
To be in tune of what they have going on. And then also another partner of ours is an organization called Be an Ally. And I believe we have Pierre here, who's going to tell us a little bit about Be an Ally and how we work together here at Reclaim Our Vote. Pierre, are you here, girl?
Girl, here. Hello, everyone. I love this forum. So Be an Ally is a social justice platform in the form of a web page that provides access to resources for everyone that would like to intentionally contribute to the creation of equality and equity for the Black collective. And while we use the term Black, it's important that we say collective, because we are not discouraging, we're not using discouraging words to define Black, right? So we aren't canceling those who grew up in Panama who are also considered themselves Black. We're not defining it as making it based to those only in America. We are saying like globally, right? So what are ways that we can affect change in terms of like equity and equality? And one of those ways is through the vote. So whether you're voting in like America or you're voting in the UK, however their voting system works, like we all understand that voting is an integral portion of creating systemic and systematic change. So we partner with Reclaim Our Vote because they directly align with our value of contributing to change via the vote, right? And an understanding that to create intention with voting, you have to first understand what you're voting for. That's why we support this forum, because they're doing exactly what we say that we need in order to inform ourselves and then create intentional choices when selecting people on the ballot. Let me know if y'all want to contribute in any other ways, because right now our only way to contribute via voting is to support Reclaim Our Vote. But if you want to contribute in other ways other than voting, then you can visit our website, which is beanally.co or beanally.co.
Awesome. Yes, we love to see it. We're all here together to increase our knowledge, you guys, so that way we can make informed decisions. It doesn't make sense to show up at these polls if we're just checking names. That makes no sense. So that's why we've all rallied and collected together. I actually don't even like that word rally. I just want to delete that word. We've all come together to create change by informing ourselves. So I'm gonna go ahead and kick it over to my bro Ross, who has a great decorated political background, and he has worked in the political space for some time. Right now he's with Accelerator for America and is also the political assistant to Mayor Garcetti here in Los Angeles. And he's going to introduce our guest speaker of the night. So Ross.
Carmen, thank you so much. I'm glad you gave me a little intro on what my background is, because last time I totally forgot to do it.
All good.
Thank you guys. Again, so great to see everybody here tonight for round two. Real quick housekeeping. The link that you signed in for, the meeting ID you used tonight, is going to be our link and meeting ID until Election Day. So just honestly put the link you used tonight in your calendar, Wednesday, 7 p.m., and you can just click that every single week, and we will be here waiting for you. Just let's continue to grow and grow and grow and share this with everyone you can. The larger we become, if we need to set up chapters in New York to accommodate East Coast time, our friends in Indiana, our friends in Tennessee, our friends everywhere. I'm not sure what time zone Tennessee's on actually, but whatever time zone you're in, we'll set it up for you. So please let us know and share it around. Okay, so it's great to see everybody. As Carmen mentioned, right now I'm working for an organization called Accelerator for America here in Los Angeles. It's actually my 1-year anniversary with Accelerator today. So that's exciting. We partner with city councils, we partner with mayors, we partner with community leaders across the country to look at where their disenfranchised communities are and work on ways that we can lift those communities up while keeping that money in the hands of those people in those communities, making sure that it doesn't go towards the wealthy people who already have it and just look towards facelifting that community and pushing those communities out, right? The leader of that work on our team is a gentleman that you'll see on your screen here, Aaron Thomas. Aaron is a fantastic colleague of ours. He is an incredible leader. He's incredibly well-spoken at explaining these issues and these matters that are very deep in economic policy, that are very complicated in business lingo and jargon that I sometimes go white-eyed on these calls. I just don't know what anyone's saying. But Aaron can communicate in a way that really breaks it down so that you know that what these issues are all about. And he's really talented and incredible and great, and he's a great friend as well. So with that said, I want to kick it over to Accelerator for America's Director of Economic Development, Aaron Thomas, to talk to us a little bit about racial inequity, economic disparity, and his work on Pete Buttigieg's Douglas Plan for Black America. So with that, Aaron, please kick it off.
Ross, thank you so much. I appreciate the intro. Thank you, Ross and Carmen, for having me. I typed it in the chat, but I'm just loving the energy in this room, so I'm gonna try to match it. And I'm apologizing to Mrs. Van Dongen in advance because I'm vulgar, and so there might be some curse words that I'm sorry. But
the most polite.
But you raised Ross, so you know, here we are. So I think, look, the thing that I think might be useful here, and I want this to be as much as it can be a discussion. So whether in the chat or interrupt me or whatever, is my audio okay? Thank you. So I figured the thing that I wanted to start with is kind of telling the story of race in America in as short a time as I possibly can, in a way that makes it very clear that none of the shit that we're dealing with right now is an accident, right? Like, this is all conscious and intentional over the past however many hundreds of years to create the dynamics that we have now, and that us being like accidentally not as racist is not going to fix any of this shit. And so I guess the two takeaways I think that I'd want to have from at least the story part is one, that not only was none of this an accident, so much of it was on purpose from like the other side, which is not only did we purposefully, consciously, intentionally discriminate against Black communities, oppress Black communities throughout, you know, American history, literally since, you know, hundreds of years before there was in America, but also we did all these things to like support white America in building and accumulating wealth and perpetuating it over time. And so to reverse that, we have to do conscious, intentional things to do that. So that's kind of part of it. So I'll tell the story, talk about what that brought about, and then talk about ways that we need to fix it. Spoiler alert, it's reparations, but we'll get to that later. So look, this comes as no shock to anybody. We were once slaves. So from 401 years ago, 1619, until 1865, Black people were slaves. So you come out of that in 1865, William Sherman issued Special Field Orders 15, which was the you know, famous 40 acres and a mule reparations, which obviously didn't end up actually going through, because imagine every freed slave having gotten 40 acres of land, particularly in the places where they were. This would look a lot different than it is today. Then we had Reconstruction, which was a failed endeavor to politically and socially integrate freed slaves into society in a way that actually protected people's rights and freedoms. That was undone by a political bargain in the 1877 presidential election. But the real idea is that, like, we needed soldiers, we needed Union soldiers in the South to protect Black people, and we decided that it wasn't worth it basically after Lincoln got killed. And that basically was the like fundamental failure that led us down the path that we were on. Then you lead after that into Black codes, which, you know, again, this is not going to surprise you, but Black people being arrested for minor infractions and being forced into involuntary labor for generations and generations and generations, which basically was just a different form of slavery. I think, you know, I'm sure a lot of people on this have watched 13th. If you have not, that's, you know, I think to get a sense for how that moment leads directly into today as far as criminal justice goes, into the Jim Crow era, forced segregation, all that kind of stuff. The thing I think is notable about this time is that you get, you know, the vast majority of Black people in America were in the South because we were brought here as slaves and we were kept down there. The second iteration of the Ku Klux Klan was the thing that basically chased Black people out of the South. So the Great Migration started in the 20s and basically went until the 70s. But the idea was that was the first time where Black people meaningfully left the South. And the reason this is relevant is because Black people then left and went to places where there was perceived economic opportunity. So you got people moving to, you know, from the South and, you know, the Black Belt, quote unquote, you know, the slave areas, to New York, Detroit, DC, moving west to Los Angeles and Oakland, Chicago, of course, all these places that became very Black places in America. And the thing that immediately happened once Black people moved into those places was that everything else, like, you know, white people basically moved out, right? And so you had white flight to the suburbs, and what happened along with that was disinvestment. So we go from being capital, literally being property, to having that, you know, to having promises broken from us, and then over time being chased out of our communities by, you know, literal violence, threats of hanging, lynching, et cetera, to going to these cities where there were manufacturing jobs, basically, right? LA, Oakland, Chicago, Indianapolis, Detroit, New York, Cleveland, blah, 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 blah. And the minute that we get there, in many places actually find opportunity, you move into the quote unquote inner city, right, of these places, and then white people moved out because they're terrified of Black people and all this kind of stuff. And with white people moved out all these resources. So there were no opportunities at that point, again, to kind of build wealth of any reasonable, you know, of any reasonable sign or size. And so these places were left without resources, forced to contend with that fact. And then once white people moved to the suburbs, they deliberately made rules so Black people could move there with them, right? So things like mortgage covenants, where, you know, it was written in the deed in most of these housing developments that you couldn't sell them to Black people. Blockbusting, redlining, which is the, you know, systemic denial of loans, insurance, housing showings, you know, even like where you put supermarkets in places where Black people live. And so there are these things that were codified in law, formally and informally, that were not allowing Black people to access the opportunity that they were creating for white people. And so during that time where Black people were precluded from all that shit, we were also just purposefully creating a white middle class. So when people came back from World War II, or, you know, the New Deal in 1932, all these things that were like created to create prosperity for white people, Black people were like deliberately written out of. So you couldn't be, you know, you couldn't work on a farm or do any kind of like rural labor, which is what Black people post-slavery did in this country, to achieve any of the benefits of the New Deal. When you came back from World War II or the Korean War or whatever, there was the GI Bill, there was the VA, all these things that allowed people to get zero interest loans, all these kind of things to allow them to like build these houses or buy these houses in the suburbs that then became the wealth that over generations kind of perpetuated and create the gaps that we have now. So if you were a Black veteran, like, you know, my grandpa was coming back from the war, and you go to the office and say, I want my free college like all the veterans get, I want my loans, you know, for housing that all the veterans get, we weren't allowed to get it. And so this is the thing that kind of started the big thing in America, that your house is your wealth, and that's still the case. And Black people were not allowed basically to own houses in places that were appreciating in any kind of value. So while we were also not allowed to access any of this shit, all the people that they wanted to achieve prosperity were achieving it during this time. Then fast forward to the 70s, where all these manufacturing jobs that we moved across the country to go get started moving overseas, right? And so that was kind of the thing that you see, like this point that led even to, like, you know, kind of the post-industrial Trumpy type places that used to be coal mining places and all that kind of stuff, or whatever, these manufacturing communities that brought so many people into the middle class. We were, of course, the first ones fired when that became the case, right? A lot of people protected their union jobs, and there are all these union politics that like did not protect Black people, right? And so then what happens in this moment, now you've moved to Chicago, or you've moved to Detroit, or you moved to, you know, Cleveland or whatever to get these jobs. People left, you know, people, resources, opportunities, investment left these communities where Black people now live because they're not allowed to live anywhere else. And then the jobs that were there for them were taken away and moved overseas, or, you know, disintermediated in some way. And so again, this is just another point at which, like, there was an opportunity for America or people or whatever to do the right thing by Black people, and just decided not to at a certain point. And right at that time, when those manufacturing jobs started to go away and economic opportunity for Black people was going back down again, Ronald Reagan was elected and completely decimated the welfare state. So simultaneously, you're getting this kind of decimation of the welfare state, which is supposed to support people who are losing their jobs, trying to find economic activity in a way that had been really successful over the past 50 years. But because of all this racist post-Nixon era bullshit, that resource was taken away from communities, both Black and white, but particularly Black communities that were hurt by these type of things. At the same exact time, crack was not accidentally, I believe, this is a little conspiracy theorist, but I actually, you know, it's been proven to be true. Our communities were flooded with crack, and as we all know and we see now in white opioid communities and black opioid communities and whatever, is that people, you know, drug crises feed on desperation and pain and sadness and a lack of economic opportunity. And so crack ravaged our communities just as we were losing actual economic opportunity. And at the same time, then all of this war on drugs, mass incarceration bullshit started, right? So then not only are you like precluding people from opportunity, you know, flooding drugs to these communities that then, you know, literally funds drug wars overseas and all this kind of stuff. Then we are hyper criminalizing these people, and you know we still do, and we have been since, you know, long before that. But this kind of, you know, the jail population or the prison population in this country doubled, tripled, quadrupled over this period of time, basically from the late 70s into like, I don't know, the Obama administration. Like it was just going up at a massive rate. Democrats, Republicans, whatever, everybody's fighting to be the toughest on crime, and that obviously hurt Black people the most. So you saw violence go up because of the crack era, because of poverty, because of lack of opportunity. You saw hypercriminalization, which then, you know, destroyed a lot of families in a lot of different ways. And all of this, you know, continued to perpetuate the lack of opportunity. So that basically leads us to today, right? Like you get the slavery, you get Reconstruction, you get Jim Crow, and then after Jim Crow with the Voting Rights Act of 65, that was basically the first time in 1965 that we were, you know, quote unquote, full citizens in this fucking country, right? And I think one thing that I think is potentially relevant to talk about here, I'm sorry I don't have slides and stuff, I just figured we could have a cool conversation, is that how recent that was, right? So we talk about this woman, I think, I don't know, there was a meme that's, or not meme, but like, you know, content that's gone across Instagram and Twitter. Ruby Bridges was the woman who integrated the first elementary, the first, you know, racially integrated elementary school. And, you know, they had to send in the federal guard and all this drama happened. She's 65 years old right now, right? Like she is like our parents' age. So this is stuff that like, I think the important thing of like what I'm trying to like, you know, string along in this narrative is that like, this shit is so recent. We were slaves for 246 years and then 100 more years of not being able to like be actual full citizens in this fucking country. And then, you know, we get one Black president, everybody's like, everything's fine. Racism's over. You guys are cool, right? And that's just completely unrealistic and obviously infuriating. And so there's so much work to be done and so much in you know, the 55 years or whatever since we've been full citizens haven't been that dope as it was for Black people anyway. So we get to this point and where does that lead us, right? So a couple different things. I'm just going to try to read off a couple stats just to get a sense for what economic inequality is now and hopefully, you know, to close the story of what all that shit that I just discussed actually created. So one, this is the biggest legacy of racial oppression in this country, is that there is anywhere from depending on the year, 13 to 14 to 1 white Black wealth gap. So for the, you know, median Black family in America, the median white family is 13 to 14 times the wealth that they do, right? So that's just like, that is the single starkest thing of our country as it stands. One notable thing about that is this is the exact same wealth gap as it was in the 60s and 70s. So even as we've gotten less racist, quote unquote, over time, and I probably wouldn't dispute that, right? This country's probably better to Black people now than it was in the fucking 40s or whatever. Like the wealth gap is still exactly the same. And white Americans have significantly more capital or higher wealth at every income level than Black Americans. We can expect to, I think Black Americans can expect to earn over $1 million less than white Americans over their lifetime on average. We have doubled the poverty rate. We have doubled the employment rate. If you think about things like all of the things that were promised as like a country, right? This like American dream bullshit, again, excuse me, is like, if you do the right thing and you go to college and you can find prosperity, the average Black college graduate has the same amount of wealth as the average white high school dropout, right? So like, doesn't matter about whatever the achievement that you've made is, like, you're still going to be worse off. Minority-owned firms have less than half of the equity or investment that white-owned firms have. Minority-owned businesses pay higher interest rates on their loans than white-owned businesses. Black homeowners pay significantly higher property taxes, even though on average, Black-owned real estate is significantly less valuable than white-owned real estate, even if you hold neighborhood and every other quality exactly the same. And so I think in every dimension of American society, and we're not talking about criminal justice and all these other things that we need that we do need to talk about, just on like an economic indicator basis, every single level, we have less mobility, we have less money, we have more poverty, we have more unemployment because of the conscious and intentional history that created that. And so I would attribute some proportion of this to, it's all based on the history of racism. But I think one of the things that, Ross and I talk about a lot at work is like, so much of this is because we are disproportionately poor. It's not even that these institutions are still racist, which they are, of course, but like they're less racist or they try to do the right things better than they used to be. But we are so much, we are disproportionately poor. And so that means it's harder for us to get a loan. That means that we have to, when we're poor, we can't access the normal banking system because of, the lack of good credit or whatever it might be. So we have to get payday loans that fuck us over, right? All these things that like prey on poor people in this country disproportionately prey on Black people, even just because they're poor, not even just because they're Black, right? Of course, we are disproportionately poor because we are Black. And then you add on all the other still racist shit that really happens now. And so the last point I'll make on like what this has created is that capital ownership, right? Like actually owning shit, which is the dream in this country, it compounds and perpetuates over time. So even these small little gaps over decades will turn into these massive, massive gaps. So, even if we had like, the difference in whatever a few of us will have, because capital compounds and increases over time, the fact that you were able to get that meager house in the suburbs of, Chicago or whatever in the 40s and 50s and 60s, now in 2020 makes you so much wealthier than the person that was precluded from it at the same time, right? Like these things perpetuate so much over time. And that is why even from the 60s and 70s, we've gotten less racist and we've tried to do things with public policy and whatever. But when you just gave people stuff in the 60s and 40s, 50s, 60s, and didn't give other people stuff or didn't allow people access to stuff, that gap was going to increase faster than anything you do in the public policy to try to close it. So that's where we sit. I think it would be useful to maybe talk a little bit about some of the answers, and these are unsatisfying, or they may or may not be. And I'd love to kind of get some feedback from you guys as to what you think about this. So one, to go back to Special Field Order 15 from General Sherman is that, it was not a hot take in 1865 to say that slaves should get some shit for having been slaves, right? That was something that was kind of generally understood and supposed to happen and promised by the US government. And of course, it was a promise that was broken. And so this is a money problem, and this is a problem of us having been capital and the country being built on our backs, and then everything perpetuated on the back of that, with none of that actually being, affirmatively redressed in any of this way. And so the first answer here is reparations, and that's the one that these conversations are increasing over time in a really, really wonderful way, that people who supposedly give a shit are being, their feet are being held to the fire of, you need to be actually talking about real solutions here instead of the bullshit of the last 40, 50 years or whatever. No offense to the last 40, 50 years. A lot of people worked really, really hard and sacrificed a lot of stuff to get us where we are now. So I don't want to minimize that, but it wasn't enough. And as much as the war on poverty and all this kind of stuff, and the civil rights movement, which is of course, such a big part of this, we have the same wealth gap as we did 50 years ago, 40 years ago. So that is the start, is that we need reparations, which, we define as one, actual payment for people. You need to give people money, and there are a few different ways that you can decide how much money to give people. The one that this guy, Sandy Darity, who's the kind of like, he's the academic authority on this stuff, has said is that basically we want to close the racial wealth gap through reparations. So at basically $1 trillion a year for 10 years by the American government, this is not a private sector thing, this is not a banks or whatever, they perpetuated it, but it's the American government's fault. $1 trillion a year to every descendant of slaves, so about 40 million people in America, will close the racial wealth gap. You could value it as the present value of that 40 acres that we were all promised, which is about $16 trillion, or the costs of the labor that we did not get, the wages that we were lost or that were not given to us. So, 24 hours of unpaid labor during slavery, the present value of that is about $14 trillion. So either way, this is a double-digit trillion-dollar problem, which a year ago would have seemed way, way, way out of reach. And now the fact that we're spending trillions and trillions of dollars to try to pull this, to stabilize this economy in the middle of COVID, maybe these numbers don't seem as big anymore. And so that's the first part, and that's the important part. The rest of it is like, or not the important part. This is one of the important parts. The rest of it is complete and total systemic and structural change, right? And so this is kind of where this plan. So Pete Buttigieg was both Ross and I got to know through work. He was on the board of the organization that we worked for and a good friend of our boss. And so I got to know him through that process. And hi, Paige, I see you and Sam there also, my lovely colleagues at Accelerator. And so when Pete decided to run, he called and asked me to kind of help him with some of this stuff. And so I basically became Pete Buttigieg's token Black person for a year, which offline we could talk about the journey that was. But what I was able to do, and I give him a lot of credit for this, was he was like, look, put the dreams on paper. I want to be very aggressive about this and I want to do it the right way. So no half measures, no bullshit. I think the idea that he was such a long shot when he started meant that he could be more aggressive. So I put all this shit on paper that I actually thought would do something about it. So the idea behind this plan was that I wrote, led the process for. I don't want to take all the credit for it. And he was certainly a part of it. But the idea is that all of these things in every part of American life, Black people have been fucked over and over and over again. And so we need to make conscious, intentional investment of real dollars at every single point of these things. So criminal justice, education, economic justice, public health and infrastructure, so pollution, water, et cetera. Voting, of course, which I think that, with Kyle's help, we're going to be talking about a little bit later, to make a material, unprecedented investment in those things in a way that we have not before. So I likened it to the Marshall Plan, which is what, America did to basically rescue Central and Western Europe after World War II, after it was decimated by the Nazis in the war. Was that the idea was not that we invested in Central and Western Europe out of the kindness of our hearts. It was because we knew that they would be better partners in trade, that we knew that they would resist communism and socialism better and all this kind of things, that like a more prosperous and stronger Central and Western Europe would be better for the world and better for America. I think the same logic applies for Black people in America, right? The way that every theory of economic growth is that capital accumulation is the juice that powers economic growth. And the communities that have been, structurally removed from accumulating capital are Black people and Native Americans. And so if you invest in the ability to accumulate capital of those people, it will supercharge our growth. So I thought that was the thing that really differentiated us. But the idea basically was that on the Marshall Plan, we spent about 5% of GDP, which is obviously massive, which for here is about, $1 trillion, $1.5 trillion of American dollars in 2020 to actually make it so Black people can more fully participate in America and seek American prosperity better. So the idea was that I think the thing that was differentiated amongst this plan was that it was a full plan and aggressive in all of these different ways. There wasn't a separate education plan or a separate criminal justice thing. It was all part of the same fucking plan because it all fits in together. And so that was the hope with this thing. It got some traction. It was fun. It was cool. And I guess the last thing I'll say, because I'm sure I'm over time and I apologize for the ramble, is that, a lot of what Ross and I and Paige try to do on our day-to-day, and Sam, is really focus on ownership, because that's the one thing that, of all things, it's ownership of capital, right? As we think about economic disparities, it's the fact that some people own shit. All the people who own shit in this country look one way and act one way and come from one background, right? And so we want to find more ways for people who don't have the disposable income, who come from these communities, who have not been allowed to access any of the engines to American prosperity, can find ways to do that. And so that's kind of our day job. And I think in many ways, and this is not something that I would say publicly or on record, a lot of ways we fail, and we fail over and over and over, because this is not a NGO nonprofit problem. This is the fucking American government. They created this shit and they need to fix it. So I'm a big believer in, that's why I'm a liberal. It's why I believe in big government, is because big government created all these fucking problems. I don't believe in the idea of now we're saying we're small government, we don't want to intervene. And so it's you know, it certainly makes me proud to work with these people and do these things that we're trying to undo them with whatever power that we have, and use new ideas and exciting stuff and local leaders who give a shit about it. But at the same time, this is eventually for the federal government to do. So I'll pause, and I don't know if we can maybe wait till later to have the, you know, a conversation or whatever, or can talk offline, whatever's helpful. But I'm really grateful to you all for having me, and for this space in this moment is really cool and really inspiring. So thank you.
Wow. Thank you, Aaron. Like, hats off. Like,
Yes.
it's so good to hear this stuff and to be able to talk about it with our peers and our community. And these are real things that we have to discuss, guys. And so it's just really cool that we can do that here. So, Aaron, I mean, I'm blown away. I'm blown away, and I really hope to hear more. And I just know that this is going to be the beginning of, you know, of working together. Like, you're so dope. So shout out to Ross for, you know, pulling you into this. Like, this is amazing. So we're just so happy to have you. Thank you so much for taking your time. And as far as discussions and stuff, we would love to do a little bit of a discussion afterwards. We can get through some things that we've planned for, but we absolutely want this time. The chat was going off. It was live. People were in there sharing links and articles and additional reading resources that supports what Aaron was talking about, and these very, very real conversations that need to be had, and people need to educate themselves on that now. We all do. So that's why we're here. So again, thank you to Aaron. We'll circle back at the tail end of our forum to do a discussion time. For now, I'm going to go ahead and pass the mic to Kyle, one of our co-creators and somebody who's been working so hard behind the scenes to really put together information for you all. She's going to cover voter suppression this evening. So Kyle, thank you so much.
Hi, thank you so much. Oh my God. That word trillion will never mean the same thing, will it? Thank you guys so much for coming here. Just so you know, like, I'm going to be trying to do email blasts every week that sort of give links and recap and, you know, give you more reading resources. And we're also recording all of these. So if you miss something or you want to share it with somebody, you're like, oh my God, Aaron, this guy blew my mind, you have to watch this. We're going to put it on the YouTubes for you guys to, like, share, because it's important. And not everybody can find this time on Wednesday evenings, and we are well aware of that. And Ross is going to be helping me with this, because I come to this group as the person who always likes to start up top with, I didn't know enough. I'm cool with admitting that. I love to think I generally graze the surface. I was like, voter suppression. I can put those two words together and know what they mean. I didn't. There's so much more. There's so much more underneath it. So I'm going to try and, like, blaze through this. And then Ross is going to help me with gerrymandering, because it's bizarre, and it's like a mathematical equation, and I'm an artist and we don't do math. Okay. So, voter suppression. The first thing that goes into voter suppression is voter ID laws. So 36 states have identification requirements at the polls. So this means, like, you have to show up at the poll with some sort of identification. And this can be, there are certain, and it goes state by state, which is a huge problem, because then you don't know, you show up to the polls and you're like, oh, I didn't realize I needed it. If you've just moved, if you're an immigrant, if you're young and it's your first time voting, there's all these different requirements. And 7 states specifically have very, very strict ID laws. I know I'm just saying numbers. I'll give you a website when we're done with this that'll allow you to check the state where you are to show what identification you need to show up to vote, because it's that fucked up. Okay, so because of the ID laws that were put in place, it's reduced voter turnout by 2 to 3 percentage points, which translates to, like, tens of thousands of voters that are just showing up and being turned away. Over 21 million, so that's 11% of US citizens do not have government issued ID photo identification. So that is, I mean, like, I lived in New Orleans and I just needed an ID, right? So I just needed an ID. It took me 2 months just to get an ID because of the way that New Orleans is set up. So, and nationally, up to 25% of African American citizens of voting age lack government issued photo ID, compared to 8% of white people. Shocker. Also, the other thing that people come up against is IDs can be costly. Between getting to the place where they need to show up for the IDs, think if you live in a rural area, or if you work all the time. So it can cost people up to $75 to $125, which may not sound a lot, but it is. Okay, so there's also the travel burden. We're talking about rural areas this is all going to be I'm from Florida, so I'm allowed to say this, but goddamn Texas. Oh boy, there's so many problems in Texas, and I'm sure Florida reeks. I mean, Florida should just sink into the ocean. I can say that I'm from there. So in Texas, some people in rural areas must travel approximately 170 miles to reach the nearest ID office. 170 miles. Think about it's already hard enough to get to vote. Now we're putting this barrier. Okay, so the other crazy thing is that it does vary from state to state. So people don't know, they show up, they are turned away from the polls. And here's another, Texas is gonna get a bad rap today. Texas will allow concealed weapons permits for voting. So you can show your concealed weapons permit, but does not accept student ID cards. There's a big problem between whether your face is on the identification card or not. There's a lot of stipulations, and that varies from state to state, and that's bonkers.
That was my favorite stat to tell people when I was working on the Beto campaign. It's bring your gun license, but don't bring your student ID.
No, because God forbid you learn, as long as you can pull them on out. Okay, so the other thing is voter ID requirements are a solution in search of a problem. So they came up with this in order to be oh, there's going to be people impersonating, or people are going to jump the party lines and vote twice. That has been debunked so many times. And in cases of impersonation, voter fraud are almost always the product of election workers or just voters making honest mistakes. Voter ID laws are a waste of taxpayer dollars. Surprise, surprise. States incur sizable amounts of costs for implementing voter ID laws. So because they have to educate them, they have to, Indiana spent $10 million providing people with state ID mailer cards. And Texas, again, spent nearly $2 million on voter education and outreach efforts following passage of its voter ID law. This isn't it's literally a mailing that says show up with this form of identification, and if you're not, you'll be turned away. It doesn't even show you how to act, where to go to get your voter ID. It's not even that specific, but still, $2 million in the bank. Okay, I'm gonna blaze through. If you want to check, if you're not from California and you want to check what your vote, what your state requires, you can go to ballotpedia.org. And we'll put that in the email, we'll put that in there. But if you need to figure it out for yourself, obviously it's tricky. They're trying to keep us away. Okay, voter registration restrictives. Okay, restrictions can include requiring documents to prove citizenship or identification. And then there's penalties that come up with this. Some states restrict registration by mandating people register to vote long in advance. This happened in New York. So New York requires voters to register 25 days before that they vote, right? And this extra step, by forcing voters to register before election, it becomes this what we're talking about of just think of emails, or how much it takes you to click on that link, or once you click on it and then 5 seconds later you're oh, look at that shiny object. It's just putting more and more barriers between people and them actually voting. Okay, voting purges, not just a film series, also something that goes on in our government. So this is cleaning up voter rolls, and it can be responsible for part of election administration because many people move, they die, or become ineligible to vote for reasons like felonies and things like that, which we'll get into later. But when they do this, these voter purges, it's almost like, I mean, this is just my take on it. It feels like a mask. So it's like, we're going to do a voter purge. And by doing that, they're disenfranchising and like pushing people out who want to vote, right? So it's a method of mass disenfranchisement, and a simple purge can stop up to hundreds of thousands of people from voting. Because as we've learned, our government doesn't necessarily have its head on its shoulders. Like, there are so many stimulus checks that were sent to just dead people, right? Because they just sent them out without checking. So if they can do voter purges, think about it. Okay, and often, a lot of the times, they're not notified correctly, so people will show up to vote on the day and told, oh, I'm sorry, you were purged, so that they can't vote, and because it's the day of, they can't re-register right away. Ugh. Okay, so this Brennan Center study found that almost 16 million voters were purged from the rolls between 2014 and 2016. Once you're purged, just think of how much it takes to get people back in. And then, okay, and the jurisdictions and the history of racial discrimination, which are no longer subject to pre-clearance after the Supreme Court gutted the Voting Rights Act. So now we're going to talk about the Voting Rights Act, because this is like a subset of voting purges. And it's fucking wild. Okay, so the Voting Rights Act of 1965, signed into by President Lyndon B. Johnson, aimed to overcome legal barriers at the state and local levels that prevented African Americans from exercising their right to vote as guaranteed under the 15th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution. Right. So this is good. We're doing things better at this moment. Yes. Well, so then basically what happened is there Shelby County versus Holder happened, which is this 2013 decision where the Supreme Court invalidated a decades-old like coverage formula of naming jurisdictions to pass federal security under the Voting Rights Act, right? So this is under that. And it referred to it as pre-clearance. This is like an important, it's a little hard to understand, but just remember pre-clearance. And they had to have pre-clearance in order to pass any new elections or voting laws. And those jurisdictions were selected based on their having a history of discrimination in voting, okay? So then what happened is, and they were supposed to like, they left the decision basically to Congress to be like, go over new criteria. Once the voting law of 1965 worked, like later on 2013, like go on the criteria, figure out how to either like make this better or figure out what to do with it or whatever, and nothing happens. They did nothing. So in practice, the decision means that communities facing new discriminating voting laws have had to file suits themselves or rely on Justice Department suits or challenges from the outside advocates. So basically, Justice Chief Roberts, who is a conservative, right, he threw out pre-clearance, citing a statute's current burdens might be justified by current needs. Basically, he said that the Voting Act right of 1965 had done what it needed to do, and now we needed to like get rid of this pre-clearance because we were all equal, which isn't true. And the coverage is based on decades old data, which eradicated the practices. So what the legal analysis boils down to is that the fact that pre-clearance was very effective in reversing disenfranchisement, so the country no longer needs this. What does this mean? There is functionally now no preemptive federal oversight of state and local voting laws. This will likely be the status quo for the foreseeable future. That's a lot. I completely understand. It's a lot. It's basically, we had this good law in place, and then the government went in and we're like, no, we're fine. We don't need it anymore. But we actually do. Because what they've done is they've found loopholes, right? So they've allowed a loophole, which is voter purging. Ross, did you want to jump in with this, The Atlantic?
Oh, yeah, sure. So basically, very similar to what Kyle's talking about. I just kind of want to read this excerpt from this Atlantic article just to show like how, and I don't want us to be that group that just like, well, Democrats are the best, because it's not. And in gerrymandering, we talk about it in a minute, like Democrats are guilty of a lot of same things that Republicans are guilty of too. When you're in power, you just take advantage of it and you go for it. However, when it comes to disenfranchising Black and brown communities, there is one party that has, in modern times, been much more guilty of it than another, and that's the Republicans. So that consent decree that Kyle kind of touched on in a minute was 35 years after it was imposed. I'm just going to read this because it's wild. 35 years after it was imposed, a judge has lifted a consent decree barring the Republican National Committee, the group that kind of is in charge of all the Republicans, from pursuing ballot security measures. In their 1981 lawsuit to stop the RNC from engaging in certain practices at the polls, the Democratic National Committee attested that in a New Jersey gubernatorial election for New Jersey's governor, the RNC had sent sample ballots to communities of color and then had names for each ballot returned as undeliverable removed from the voter rolls. So essentially, if they sent you a sample ballot and it came back as undeliverable because you had moved or something along those lines, they just said, scrap them, get them off the voter roll, we don't need them. Democrats had also alleged that the RNC hired off-duty cops to patrol majority-minority precincts wearing National Ballot Security Task Force armbands. These details were enough to secure a consent decree between the two-party organizations in the court in 1982, stopping the GOP from engaging in such voter intimidation practices. So great, in 1982, a jury's like, no, you can't be doing that, that's bad, stop. Except they didn't. The consent decree was updated in 1987 after Republicans created a voter challenge list of Black voters from whom letters had been returned as undeliverable. So again, it's still happening 5 years later, with an RNC official saying that this list could keep the Black vote down considerably. The decree was modified again in 1990, 3 years after that. The court ruled the RNC had violated it by not telling state parties about its provisions, which had led to North Carolina's GOP sending 150,000 postcards to potential voters listing voting regulations in an apparent attempt at intimidation. So basically sending specific groups of voters in which they don't want to vote, all of these requirements that they have to fulfill in order to be able to vote, to say like, I don't know, this is confusing, maybe I just won't do it. The GOP violated the court order again in 2004 after yet another voter challenge list targeted Black voters. So like again and again and again, various Republican groups, whether at the state level or federal, are just kind of going around these court orders, doing things and basically saying like, let's just ask for forgiveness rather than for permission, right? And now, 35 years later, similar to what Kyle said, a federal judge has said, you know what? It seems like this is all kind of done. We're fine, we're good. And like lifted the consent decree. So now the RNC may or may not try to exhibit the same tactics again. And we saw in 2016, we definitely saw in 2018 in Georgia, and we have seen right recently in the last couple of weeks in Georgia and in Kentucky that these tactics are alive and well. In 2017, Brian Kemp, the Secretary of State of Georgia, purged 506,000 Georgian voters from the voter rolls. In 2018, he purged like another 300,000. Last year, he purged another 100,000 as governor. Like it's still happening. Okay, this man was allowed to purge nearly 1 million voters, 800,000 voters during a time where he was running to be governor as Secretary of State. He was purging voters that he knew would not vote for him. And he was legally mandated to do that. So these are things, and this all goes kind of, Kyle, you probably have more to talk about. So let's kick it back to you.
One more, because of course, one more thing. There's two more things in voter suppression, but the other one is felony disenfranchisement, which I think wraps back into what we were talking about, because a felony can be assault, rape and sexual assault, promoting prostitution, kidnapping, theft, arson, and drug crimes. So a felony is a crime punishable by death or imprisonment in excess of 1 year. So, and if you remember from our last meeting, that was one thing that was good that George Gascon said, that he wants to move felonies down to misdemeanors, but it inhibits people from voting. As said a million times over, like felony disenfranchisement laws disproportionately affect Black people. One example is in Iowa, a system of permanent disenfranchisement paired with the most disproportionate incarceration rate of Black people in the nation has resulted in a disenfranchisement of an estimated 1 in 4 voting age Black men. 1 in 4. That's my last. You can take over gerrymandering.
Well, hold on. Like one more thing on there. We talked about this a little bit when we were leading up to this call. Most states have some, restriction on how and when felonies can vote, or felons can vote, whether it be a period of time after their parole, whether it be for life, right? If you're a convicted felon, there is restrictions put on you for voting, except in 2 states. And those 2 states are Maine and Vermont. And I want you to think about what race group probably takes up the majority population in prisons in Maine and Vermont.
White
people. Okay? In prisons in Maine, in Maine generally, 95% of the entire Maine population is white. In their prison system, the white population is 81%. So that shows you right there, like something's messed up. It's disproportionate. However, in Maine, 2% of the entire population is Black. In prisons, 9% of the population in Maine is Black. That is crazy. That is a huge disparity. But even so, because there's so many white people in prison there, Mainers, convicted felons in Maine, have the right to still vote. The same, a very similar situation in Vermont. So that just shows you, when you rely on a certain voting block to get elected, you'll make exceptions to your long, hard and fast rules if it advantages you. So that's just one more felony. That's the thing that like really gets my blood boiling. If you haven't read The New Jim Crow, please go read it. You will be ramming your head into so many different walls around your apartment, but it's so eye-opening. This whole system is so intentional. It's crazy. Anyway, playing into voter suppression a little bit. I know we're over time. If you have to go, we understand it's being recorded, but stick around, because I think we still need to talk to Aaron about his brilliance. So just hang out for a few more minutes. Gerrymandering, you might have heard this word before. It gets thrown around a lot. I think we're just gonna touch on it real quickly and then probably do a whole segment about it down the line. But gerrymandering is essentially states redrawing their maps so that they are more able to pick the voters within specific congressional or legislative districts. And it is named after this governor in Massachusetts in the 1800s named like Elridge Gerry, who approved a congressional map in Massachusetts that was so wacky that there was this one district that looked like a lizard, and someone said, "Oh, that looks like a salamander," and then another guy said, "No, it's a gerrymander." And if you're wondering why a guy named Gary ended up having a phrase named after him called gerrymander, it's because white people aren't creative. But that's a story for another day. So it's a hot button issue right now, and it happens in states all over the place. It is redistricting and redrawing of maps is really another confusing topic, because we're in this beautiful country where states' rights are everything. Every state gets to determine how they redraw their maps, and they're all different. Some states say, you know what, our state legislative bodies get to redraw them. Some states put up commissions, whether it be a handful of their state legislators, maybe even on the Republican Democrat side, maybe just slightly weighted for whatever party maintains power. Or some put up independent commissions that are like screened for bias to say, just to have the most representative maps possible. Some states that have their maps drawn by legislative bodies have a situation where their governors can veto those maps. Some don't. So there's just a wide disparity of systems in place to draw these maps. But frequently, whatever party is in power just gets to say whatever they want. And often it leads to, especially in states where there's a lot of voter suppression going on, Black and brown communities being surgically removed or smashed together so that they are either as least represented as possible in certain districts or so heavy in other districts that it limits the power that those populations, communities have, because now they're all in one district versus a good amount in several, right? There was a situation in Wisconsin last year, just about a year ago now, in late June, where their congressional map was basically like, people took a look, the courts took a look at it and they're like, no way, this is not okay. This is crazy. Every district is insane. I mean, you look at some, they'll be like a bar here, a sliver going down this way, and then it circs up a highway up into a river and then cuts to, they're nuts. So it went appealed all the way up to the Supreme Court. And people were finally saying, okay, this is the moment. The Supreme Court of the United States is going to have to take a stand on whether or not gerrymandering is okay and to what extent is okay. We're going to have regulations and words that we can count on to say this is okay or this isn't. However, because this is where we are, our 5-4 conservative Supreme Court just said, nah, nope. This is a strictly political issue, and we couldn't possibly, being the Supreme Court of the United States, take a stance on a strictly political issue. The federal courts can't be involved in that. So basically just saying, whoever has the ball gets to make the rules, and that's how it's going to be. So that's really brief. I want to do a deep dive on that later because there's so much to get into, and it's really fascinating. But moral of the story, make sure you know who your state legislative representative is and fucking vote for them. And do your census, because again, as we talked about last week, if you are not counted, we are not represented. And it really matters because we could lose districts and lose representatives. And those are the people making the decisions. So be counted. Exactly as Sydney said, do it for me, please. Thank you. And with that, Carmen, let's get into this discussion.
Yes, you guys, so much information. It's a lot to process, but that's why we're here to talk about it together. And we're not saying we're the experts, we're not saying we have the solutions, but we are here to talk about this and create discussion. Before we jump into that, I do want to intro a little segment that we have coined. It's called Reclaim Our Happy Hour. It's based around the idea of, we're not going out, y'all. And if you are, you need to take your ass back inside because you don't need to be outside at these little bars or wherever you at. Go ahead and crack you a cold one in your crib. So in lieu of not going out and, buying a cocktail, why not donate that money to some causes that can actually do something? So Reclaim Our Happy Hour, that's what this segment is. Mine, last week we touched on the fact that when police get in trouble, they investigate themselves, they prosecute themselves. That makes no sense. So I kind of did some digging and saw that actually there's an organization called Campaign Zero. I'm sure you guys have heard of them before, but their funds are donated. The funds that are donated support the analysis of policing practices across the country. They research to identify effective solutions and to end police violence. They also offer technical assistance to organizers leading police accountability campaigns and the development of model legislation and advocacy to end police violence nationwide, and including how they are prosecuted when they kill somebody, for instance. I am looking to perhaps start a conversation with them, so I'd love to maybe have a follow-up with that next week. But my Reclaim Our Happy Hour spotlight goes to Campaign Zero. So Kyle, would you like to highlight your Reclaim Our Happy Hour organization?
Yes. So thank you. So my friend Miguel Pinzon, who inspired this, and I were talking earlier today, and Shockey Peters and Bree Black were the 19th and 20th killings of trans people in the United States in this year. My organization to highlight is called Black X Collective. And it was started as a youth volunteer organization to help queer and trans kids. And now they've sort of morphed into using art, action, and political education to help young trans and queer youth. So it's Black X Collective, and we'll put it down, but they've got a GoFundMe starting. And yeah, that's mine. Drink up.
Amazing. That's huge, Kyle. Thank you. And thank you, Carmen. Mine, just to kind of piggyback off of voter suppression and Stacey Abrams. Stacey Abrams started an organization called Fair Fight 2020. Fair Fight 2020 goes to making sure that the shit we're seeing in Kentucky, the shit we're seeing in Georgia, we can minimize it, or at least have resources in place to inform the most vulnerable voters, young people, Black and brown voters, impoverished voters, so they know what their rights are. Just like those education projects in Texas, we have another situation that's actually going for the people that are being disenfranchised. It is headed up by Stacey Abrams, a potential VP contender. If you've heard her, you know how amazing she is. If you haven't heard her, please look into her because she is incredible. It's called Fair Fight 2020. Throw some dough at them. They're incredible.
Amazing. And, you know, we just want to remind everybody a little phrase that even Kyle had kind of coined and kind of been saying throughout all of this is that, you know, if you have time to post, then you have time to click a donate or sign a petition or just do something. We want action. Like, yes, we're talking, but we want to inspire action to do something, because we can no longer sit on our ass and act like shit's not fucked up. Okay. So on that note, we are going to open up the discussion. If you have to leave, then we appreciate you so much. Thank you for coming. Email us. I saw somebody put in the chat that they want to get informed. We are building our website right now, so we don't have like a nifty, like little, you know, click to sign up or whatever. But if you just follow Reclaim Our Vote on Instagram, you can be updated that way. Maybe put your email into the chat and we can add you onto that list. Go ahead, Kyle.
Oh, sorry. I think the easiest way, just for me, because it's like you know, office work and Kyle, if you could go to our Instagram and just DM us your email, and I will add it to our list. Just so because we have like so many people in the chat already that I don't want it to get lost. So if you do that, I think that's the best way you can catalog it. And please put your first and last name in there too. If that's cool. If you're not comfortable with sharing it over Instagram, I don't know, because people are watching, let me know.
Yes, thank you, Kyle. That's even better and more organized and streamlined. That's why we're here together, working on it, you know, together. And as far as our discussion, again, if you have to leave, thanks again. If you want to stick around and ask some questions, Aaron, if you're still around, I'm sure the people are, you know, have some questions for you, or just discussion topics. Last time we kind of just let people chime in. So if you have something that you want to say, feel free to unmute yourself and we can start there.
I'll start with a quick one from last week. Hi, I'm Katrina, everyone. So yeah, we were, just to piggyback off of our discussion last week about the DA's office possibly being separate. I reached out to some lawyer friends and I'm waiting to hear back. Like, I basically gave her like a little canned statement about what we're doing and just trying to be more informed voters and enacting change and all. And so she is putting me in contact with hopefully some lawyers that have worked with the ACLU and some local lawyers in LA that either are already working in the office that is supposed to be prosecuting these cases, or with the, hold on, she told me the name of it's like the department. There's like a specific department that's specifically supposed to focus on this also, that already exists. So I asked her about any ways that we can help empower them or see who's running that right now and where their interests lie. because there's apparently also a committee or like an office of some sort, a department that should kind of be a part of this checks and balances in terms of the current DA's office. So hopefully I'll have more concrete information next week, but I just wanted to let everyone know that like hopefully we'll have some more expert insight on if there's already something, because she's a lawyer too in civil rights and has worked with people that have worked with Rossi and stuff. So she said she might be able to tell me if someone has already had something similar to this happen or something close to this come down the pipeline. So,
and this is to select or like to get an independent investigator. Tell me if I'm saying this correctly.
This was me asking her like what the next steps would be in terms of writing one to get, like I full on went Schoolhouse Rock and like Googled making it legit and was like, okay, who can we get to author our bill once we're done reading it or whatever. And so that's kind of where I started with her, and we talked for like a half an hour earlier.
What is the bill, just if people weren't on this?
Oh, sorry. So what we're discussing right now is what was discussed a second ago in terms of police, when charges are brought against them, it goes to the DA's office, which is often the people that they work with every day. It's very similar to, I'm from Florida too, so I'm very much from a place where like good old boy government is real as hell. Like sheriffs really can do whatever they want and be the same dude for a decade. Like all that shit is real. And Ahmaud Arbery's case, one of the reasons that amongst the tape getting hidden and everything else was the DA saying, this guy is my friend, he's worked with me for 20 years, I'm not prosecuting this. And that just seems like a conflict of interest and an intense nepotism that definitely should have been addressed by now. So we were talking about the possibility of there being a separate DA's office that I have termed the People's Court, dun 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 dun, and seeing what the reality could be in terms of those cases going to people that aren't immediately thrust into a conflict of interest with the people that they also need to work with every day. Because if you're a DA and this case you can't do your best job without worrying about if that is going to affect you later when you need evidence from that precinct or whatever. It's like too much. It's way too much of a conflict of interest. So that's where all of that brainstorming came from.
Yeah, makes absolutely no sense, yet it's the law. We are welcome to pass the mic. Anybody who, I see Aaron still here, so if you have any direct questions or discussion points that we want to go ahead and bring up, please do so. Feel free to unmute yourself.
I did have a question. I mean, like you touched on this real briefly, Aaron, and something I think is so important that we don't talk about a lot is you mentioned environmental justice. And I think so frequently people don't conflate the fact that environmental justice reform is directly tied to Black and brown communities, impoverished communities, communities of color, and how those people are the first affected and the most affected. I mean, we all saw this, you know, in the early 2000s with Katrina. We've seen it in North Carolina with hog farms and poisoned water. I mean, I guess I don't know what my question is, but it's just like, how can we, do you think reparations and getting that money in the hands of those people like would automatically lift them up? Or is there another investment that needs to happen? How do we get environmental policy and race policy and economic equality policy like tied in?
Yeah. So, I mean, look, environmental justice is the phrase that you use, and that's the right one, which is like, there's a reason that Black people over-index on asthma and obesity and all these things that like are directly correlated with the like shitty conditions in the communities that we've been stuck living in, right? And so there are two, you know, I think for me, I think about it in two different answers. One is like reparations changes everything, because if you suddenly have $200,000 that you didn't have before because you, for 400 years, you've been, you know, not allowed to get it or whatever, you can move to a neighborhood that doesn't have those conditions, right? You can raise your kids in different conditions and you can like live a different life. But the flip side is that like somebody's going to live in Flint. Somebody's going to live in, you know, North Carolina, like somebody's going to live in these places where the environmental conditions are awful and not suitable for fucking humans in the richest country in the world. And so they need to be invested in regardless, right? And so that, like, we've never prioritized it, and this is no surprise to anybody on this call, but like we've
You muted yourself.
accident. We've never prioritized any of these things because we've never taken upon ourselves to give a shit about Black people, right? Like, and these are just things that like we think only Black people have to deal with. And now that they're starting to happen in places like West Virginia and all these fucking, you know, all these places where like stereotypically like white people are, even that's the same thing with the opioid crisis, right? And so there are every you know, Democratic presidential candidate, I know that you guys don't want to make this super partisan, has economic justice plans, right? And when you start talking about things like a Green New Deal and all the stuff that like AOC's taking the lead on, like that's where that stuff really comes in, because one, that those are jobs that uplift people, but two, the environmental change is going to disproportionately affect and benefit the most vulnerable among us, who unfortunately are disproportionately Black.
It's like Corona. Like I had a bunch of people saying, guys, just be careful when you go out to vote, when you go out to march, because somebody posted a meme and I had to come for her in her DMs a little bit. She was like, yeah, like Black people are disproportionately affected by Corona and you need to be aware of that. And I was like, yeah, but not because we're like genetically predisposed to have it worse. It's because of economic injustice. Like, goodbye. Please reword, like, please understand what you're talking about before you start talking about it. Okay, bye.
No, facts.
Aaron, I have a question, and to be honest, I don't know how much. I know you've been involved in a number of conversations with, I think, a few different mayors. Could you share what you know about the Mayors for a Guaranteed Income Coalition that's like just started? And that's part of me just not reading enough about it yet or really knowing exactly what the plan is, but I know you likely know more than.
No, it's interesting. So there's this dude in Stockton, California, which is about 2 hours east of San Francisco, maybe an hour and a half east, named Michael Tubbs, who's the young, you know, he's like the young upstart mayor of the city he grew up in. He ran for city council as a senior in college at 22 years old. He became mayor at 26, 27. He is kind of like so he did this pilot funded by Jack Dorsey, who started Square and Twitter, to do an experiment on guaranteed basic income. And he focused it, like, you know, the idea is UBI, universal basic income, but also as a means of poverty alleviation. He started with, I think it was 200 families that got $500 a month. And they did that for 18 months. And that experiment, I think, just ended. And so they learned all these things that, like, again, this kind of goes to the racism that other people were talking about, which is like, we assume, you know, the racist assumptions of this country that, like, if you give poor people money, they're going to go spend it on rims and fucking, you know, steaks or whatever the stereotype is, right? Where it's like, people always spent these things on groceries and childcare and food and maybe a video game for their child. You know what I mean? And so these lessons started coming out. And so then what Tubbs did was engage a bunch of mayors across the country, including ours. I think Keisha Lance Bottoms is on there. I think there's a list of 11 mayors. I think all of them except for Garcetti are Black, who are experimenting with doing the same thing in their cities. And they're going to kind of raise money around this idea that, like, and again, I think this is a really cool thing about this time, and I give Tubbs a lot of credit for this, is that, like, experimenting with, like, new shit, because none of this stuff works. And that's the dope thing about having, like, young people who come from these communities leading cities, is that, like, they're not beholden to the old boomer shit that, like, people were taught in whatever the fucking stupid political economies they were taught that, like, only help rich white people or people that come from privileged backgrounds like I do or whatever. And so people are actually trying new shit, and hopefully we're going to learn some stuff from it. So the next phase of that is, I think 11 cities are going to try to pilot it in some capacity. And so, you know, Garcetti said he wants to be part of that. So I think we'll probably be doing something like that in LA. Did that answer the question?
Yeah, it does. And this is, I mean, to be honest, this is something I was going to just text you about anyway. And I just thought of it. And I know everyone on this call would likely be interested in that too. So, and I just knew about it.
And going, like what you said about, you know, people thinking that Black people are going to go buy all these like luxurious things. I mean, you know, you've been on some of these calls with me, or maybe like Paige has definitely been on some of these calls with me, where we're trying to start these programs to get money in the hands of people right now who are the most impacted by the coronavirus. And it is a well-intentioned question, but it's so ignorant and it's base, is that the first thing that people ask are like, and is there a way to regulate what stores they're going to with the cards? Because I don't want people just going to the liquor store immediately. And it's like, totally, for sure. But like our data shows that they're buying food, Betsy. Like, and it's so like, you know where they're coming from, and it's maybe a logical question to ask, but they just.
I feel like it's a logical question if you don't know any Black people or minorities and you get all of your
Or
information
poor people.
from like what you're told from other people who also don't know or have been told. It's like you're passing down these like bulleted facts from like what Aaron was talking about when you're sitting like because I feel like it's like people's parents who saw Bush on TV say that the war on drugs is so important because it was across the street from the White House when he ordered that shit like it was a pizza. And then that dude did 20 years when the drugs weren't even near them when they created this fear. And then those parents who already didn't know any minorities point at the TV and say, look at them. Those are those people. And now I have their kids telling me what my community does, and they have no frame of reference but the bullet points that were given for them by other racist people.
Right. The term is, it's implicit racism and it's learned. So that's how it's being passed down. It's because it's not that they are just learning that from random organizations or random people. It is beliefs that my family once held, and they pass it down, and they pass it down by the relationships formed with children, right? Because that is when we are most susceptible to like learning and taking in new information. So when you're a kid, your parents tell you things, and whether it's something simple like be careful for Johnny because you know he steals, but Johnny is also a Black kid. That is how implicit biases are formed in children. And as an adult, you don't realize like, I am afraid of Black people stealing because of something that my mother told me. But if you don't question like where does that thought initiate from, then you will never realize that it is not grounded in a truth that you adhere to, but you will follow along like blindly or complicitly.
It's why I got Venmo'd when we started talking about reparations. I got Venmo'd by a bunch of like liberal white people that I know. First of all, it was like anywhere between like $5 to $20. And I'm sorry, if it's not a rent check, get the fuck out of here, in my personal opinion. Sorry. But like, because people assume that like I'm sitting here waiting for a white person to Venmo me for $5 because I'm one of those poor brown people. I'm not. I mean, no, I literally am, but like,
but not really.
Right. My parents would be so resentful, and are, especially as like my parents are from the Caribbean. They're like very educated people who have spent a lot of time working their asses off to make a whole bunch of money so that I could be really educated, and to get Venmos from people who make the same amount of money as I do. I just want to buy you a coffee. I was like, I don't want you to. I make my own.
My best friend is Jamaican, and she was like, why is everybody wishing me a happy Juneteenth?
Oh my God.
Oh, my grandma raised hogs, send them over here. Like, but that's like, even what Ross was saying about people, I feel like there's obviously different spectrums of it, but even in terms of being well-meaning, there is this, because Ross wrote racism cured. I feel like that fear and that guilt is the knee-jerk reaction of like, okay, so what's the most immediate thing I can do? Right. I like Sid, I'll take her out. Like, right, to cure. Been in groups of friends that were like, I was like, man, people have been trying to Venmo me, and my other friend was like, me too, and then my third one was like, ain't nobody trying to Venmo me. So I feel like, just like there are so many different reactions to that, because also being from Florida, it's like, okay, yeah, that makes you feel weird, but I got people over here like I'm trying to defend BLM as fucking racist, like they think they're gonna come hunt down white people in their houses. And so it's like, you let somebody give you $5, I guess, because it's way better than people that are feeding into what we were saying, what she was saying about implicit racism, I feel like the media and everything they do is, okay, you know, however many Black people you are or aren't around, you were taught these things. And then what do you see on TV? The same things reiterated. So then even if isn't based in fact, that's what you're taking as your proof. The people that are arguing with me right now, that's what even the videos of the looters, of the rioters, they're taking that's their proof.
And it doesn't.
Yeah, it's by
it
design.
affect us. There's a whole bunch of Blackness that affects us, which is crazy because I don't think about that in my own self. But
so it boils down to what people are accepting as this is how I am taking responsibility for the action that I may have played by rectifying. I now feel, what's the word? I don't know. This is my peace offering to any injustice that I might have provided to any Black person. Does that $5 coffee equate to you taking social responsibility for,
did you take
I don't know, your plight or your piece that you may have played in the enjoyment of these systems? Like, maybe you might have participated in the blackface party and you didn't know that that was a racist thing. So let me buy you a coffee because I once too participated in this thing. So it's like,
I will say that maybe those are things that aren't necessarily like, oh, I'm learning about systemic racism and the things that I've benefited, but they might be thinking of a very specific thing to you, Sydney, where they feel like they should have stood up to you or for you or whatever. And it seems weird to you, but that's if they got
it's internal, but it's all
internal. I would rather the responsibility taken to, like, this is what I hope everybody starts to do.
Right.
Like, you have a moment, you reach out and you say, oh my gosh, I just remembered such a, like my best friend since I was 3. My screen name, I had an identity crisis. I grew up in Connecticut. My screen name in 6th grade was Oreo492, and I thought that shit was hilarious. Mm-hmm. My best friend, Jake and Ross, you know him well, the lovely Stephen Nason, messaged me like a month and a half ago and was just like, can I just tell you, I just cried for like 3 hours over how fucked up that is, and like how we all sat there and made the screen name with you. I was like, oh, I untangled that like 10 years ago, but you're right. Like,
welcome.
Thank you. No, I appreciate that. I'd rather that than the $5 because that to me says that you're literally going through your actions, and it doesn't mean replay every interaction you've ever had, but like if you do notice and if you are able to reflect and look back, you should reach out.
That probably alleviates the weight that their other friends were hoping that $5 would.
Oh, 100%. I mean, I took it.
Guys, like I just recently, like within the last couple of weeks, had to come to terms with the fact that my extreme reverence of Barack Obama and my need to like display my reverence of Barack Obama comes from a very deep-seated subconscious racist place where I have to like talk about this Black man who is so extraordinary so much to like make up for whatever racist shit I've done in my life. Like I have a fucking picture of him sitting in Rosa Parks' bus seat on my wall, and I'm not taking it down by any means, but like it's there and like that's real. And I just recently had to be like, okay, that's what that is.
I would see that in your house and be like, oh wow, all right, Ross, I got it.
But that's an awareness. So, but it is awareness though. It's just like, I know where this stems from. And now you're taking action to educate other people on something that is important that plays into their biases, which is like dispelling or debunking all of these ballot basics and what they really mean. So you're taking action. So it's more than just you acknowledging where you might have participated, but you're also taking action to prevent other people from doing the same thing. So that's what like being an ally is, and that's why what you're doing is dope, and that's why I like listening to you talk.
Thank you.
I have one quick question for Aaron, and you might have explained this, but when you were talking about the war on drugs and mass incarceration, and then you said the ending of welfare state. What is the ending of welfare state?
So, thanks for calling me on that. So, for so long, America was like much more socialist than we think of it right now, right? Like starting with the New Deal in 1932 during the Great Depression, like we did a lot to support people who had lost their jobs or come on hard times, right? And then one of the things in the backlash after 68 into the 70s with the Nixon era, and then what really kind of like really came to a head with the election of Ronald Reagan is this like hyper conservatism that was like, we're not giving handouts to these welfare queens in Chicago who've got a bunch of kids who are having kids to get more welfare checks and all this like bullshit narrative. That was a Reagan era thing. And so the point that I was trying to make, and I appreciate you calling me on it, is that like, just as all of these like economic things were affecting these communities. So like in the 70s, deindustrialization started happening. So all these good jobs that you didn't need to go to college for, whatever, like Black people moving up for the South had like built up a life on, were going away right as they were experiencing that economic hardship. Reagan came in and was like, look at all these lazy people on the fucking welfare and let's take away all the welfare. And so it just doubled down on the pain, was the point that I was making. And so ever since then, we've just chipped away over and over and over at the welfare state, to the point where the biggest chip away, other than what Reagan did, was then what Bill Clinton did in 1996 with quote unquote welfare reform, where he changed it. So like, then you do all these kind of like quasi-racist work requirements where like you drug test people who are going on welfare because you think they're all on crack or whatever the fucking thing is. And so we've continued to chip away at this thing. And one of the conversations that I think we're starting to have in a good way, especially because of Corona, because now we're not as much saying that the people who've lost their jobs are lazy Black people. It's because of this fucking, this deadly virus that we fucked up. Then now we're starting talking about like, again, how do we take care of poor people in a way that actually is dignifying and helpful? Does that help? Like, does that help at all?
Yeah. I mean, I think it was just like, I thought I thought I knew what it meant. And then I was like, no, Kyle, maybe you should ask.
Thank you so much. Yeah, no, this is not like, for me, the work that I'm doing now, like obviously at work with Ross, but also like kind of with the public policy stuff I'm doing with Biden, or with the stuff that I did with Pete, was like, that's the thing I really care about, is the poverty part, because we fucked that up just about as badly as we fucked up race.
Right. Well, and I think it's like a lot of people, we graze over, we say like, oh yeah, I know what that means. And we push it aside, but truthfully, we don't understand where it comes from, or the exact meaning of it, or how deep it goes, or how layered it is. Like the how you connect. Well, I mean, that's the thing, how you connected, but it is all connected. To hear it like in succession, I was just like, whoa. Because that's the thing is that we hear a term and we just sort of like understand it from the surface level. And we, as like this, woke millennial generation, just nod our heads and say yes. And are like, oh my God, yeah, I'm a Democrat. Of course they do. But we never really ask the questions, because we're also afraid of sounding stupid.
Well, I'm grateful for you
It's like that shit with the cage.
Yeah.
Analogy with the cage and the bar, and you're looking at that one bar, and it's like, why don't you just go around that bar? But if you're looking farther back, you see that they all connect in a way that you can't get out.
I'd never heard that before.
It's in a book or something.
I think the reason why we're like this generation, why we are also questioning things too, is because context is created by perspective, and perspective is created based on experience. So we don't share their same experience, which is why we're questioning like their perspective on things, because we are a generation that has experienced things differently than them. So it's easier for us to pick apart what's happening because it's not ingrained in our current experience as well. So that's why we're able to make the connections or create context in like to found it, like to make the understanding of what's happening and how it doesn't like help us basically. Shit.
Mm-hmm.
I got it. Context is created by perspective, and perspective is created by experience. Oh shit!
I like that.
For everybody that is on the call, I am an IO psychologist. Like that's all I do. Is create context.
That makes me feel so much better.
Your hands, please.
Check my IG out. That's all. Check my Twitter out.
I'm so glad you're here.
Wow.
Connecting the dots for us. You guys, we could do this all night, but we do want to honor people's time and save the energy for next week. We want you all back here. We're weekly on Wednesdays. We claim our vote. Black Boys Recycle, be an ally. We are just all here to, come together to share knowledge, to have discussion. A special shout out to Aaron. So knowledgeable. Like, it was so, I could listen to you talk for a long time, a really long time. So I just thank you so much. We all thank you for taking the time out of your day and talk about things that need to be talked about, so we definitely appreciate you, and we hope to see you on our calls again, and we hope to build with you and do more.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for creating this space. I chatted Carmen and Ross and Kyle, but like the energy that you get on, that you feel immediately as you log on this call is so fucking dope. And it was really cool for me to be a part of. So thank you for creating it and having me.
Thank you.
That's amazing to hear that, because that's what we want. And so to see that translated, it's our best dreams come true. So again, for everybody, you guys, it's the same ID. So this is the same ID forever. So every Wednesday at 7 o'clock, we'll be here. You can connect and enter in the same ID that you've used this time for next week. We have our email blast coming. We have this recorded. We are in the very, very infant stages of a website of some sort. So we're just putting things together as they come. We're no experts here, but again, we're just coming together as a peer group to create change in actionable ways, and picking apart this system that has been designed to keep us down and ignorant. So no longer will we do that. So that's all I have to say. If anybody else wants any closing remarks or anything before we head out.
Thank you all so much. I just want to say thank you all for sharing your expertise and your knowledge, and just being so generous and opening this community so much. Thank you.
Thank you, Kirsten.
I'll see you guys next week.
Yay!
Thank you guys. This is so awesome.
Bye.
Everybody.
Bye.